Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does he stand by his statement, quote, "Every day New Zealanders are making decisions to change their behaviour based on changes in the oil price, and if so, how will those behaviour changes be reflected in government infrastructure investment?"
The Honourable Bill English. Order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. What we do know is in response to price increases, fuel technologies continue to evolve. Vehicles are becoming more fuel efficient as we see modern diesel engines, the development of hybrid engines, and also more and more talk of electric cars emerging. I think if fuel prices continue to rise, you'll see a faster uptake of these technologies, and you'll continue to see more of what's happening in Auckland now, where the Auckland Transport needs to put on more buses to cater for the upsurge in demand for public transport, not all of which is on trains, most of which is actually on buses who need the roads.
Gareth Hughes.
To the Minister. What choices does a shift worker living in Flatbush, Manukau have with petrol 91 at $2.19 a litre to avoid those high oil prices when there's no public transport and that person can't afford a new hybrid electric car?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is the opportunity Auckland has now that it is has a unified council to rethink its transport services and its public transport services so they can meet the needs of the increasing number of Aucklanders who want to use public transport. That growth is most likely to be stronger in buses, and buses need roads that are not congested. If we can deliver an efficient highway network, I'm sure we'll see stronger uptake in public transport, particularly if fuel prices keep rising.
Gareth Hughes.
Does the Minister agree with Dr Stephen Rainbow from Auckland Transport Agency, who said bus congestion is a problem in downtown Auckland right now, and we won't resolve that until the Central City Rail Loop is completed?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not necessarily. There's all sorts of benefits that are claimed for the CBD rail loop. We are going through a considered and hard-headed process of analysis with the City Council to make sure that the considerable expenditure that Aucklanders will need to make in that loop are going to yield the benefits that are claimed.
Gareth Hughes.
How will there be enough buses and trains to meet the huge and growing demand when the government has effectively capped transport funding for public transport services over the next decade?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the figures I've seen show that this government is spending more money on public transport than any government ever has. And I might say we've spent quite a bit of time reorganising the funding and governance arrangements so there's clear accountability, full transparency around the funding, and strong incentives for improved performance in public transport. So while we are building, we have a big roading investment. We see that as complementary to our public transport policy, and public transport policy has never been in better shape.
Gareth Hughes.
Supplementary. Given petrol is now the most expensive ever in our country's history, what choices do people actually have when buses and trains are overcrowded and government is spending $10 billion on more motorways they can't even afford to drive on?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member that ideally our public transport system would be running with sufficient capacity to enable people to have reasonable choice about whether they use a private car or public transport. And I'd imagine that Auckland Transport right now is rethinking how to expand capacity to cater for the increased demand. However, I don't think that any increase in demand I can imagine is going to have most people give away the opportunity of having their own car and the freedom and mobility that gives them. And with that in mind, the government will continue to invest in a comprehensive roading network in Auckland.
Supplementary.
Gareth Hughes.
Given we now have the most expensive petrol in New Zealand's history, what choice does, say, a Gisborne-based logging company have to avoid high oil prices in truck transport and still get their logs to market when the state-owned railway company is potentially closing the local railway line?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the practicalities is that even if the railway line was open, it can't, or even if it was carrying a lot of logs, you still are going to need trucks to get the logs to the railway and then get it off the railway and into the port. The fact is that logging operator will have to make, whether they like it or not, will have to make the same choices as anyone else, and that is if they can find more fuel-efficient trucks and get their logistics of shifting the logs more efficient, then they're going to be able to reduce their fuel consumption. And I'm quite sure most logging operators are thinking that through right now precisely because the fuel prices are so high, as the member says.
Gareth Hughes.
Supplementary. Well, in the upcoming budget, will the government change its transport funding to switch to projects that reduce our reliance on expensive oil, and will it plan for more buses and trains that New Zealanders desperately want now to take, instead of wasting $10 billion on more motorways they can't even afford to drive on?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I think that the difference of opinion here is not so much about the effect of high fuel prices. High fuel prices are going to force people to make different choices about their transport, whether it's more efficient fossil fuel transport or public transport. The difference is we don't see public transport and building roads as mutually exclusive. We're doing both. We're doing both well. You can argue about whether the level of investment should be higher, but I'd have to say the level of investment in both is higher than it's ever been in New Zealand because we believe efficient infrastructure is important to a productive economy, more jobs and higher incomes.
Question number 10. Point
Speaker.
of order, Gareth Hughes.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table this excerpt from a Cabinet paper by Transport Minister Stephen Joyce, which says he effectively capped funding available for public transport services in 2009.
What's the date of this Cabinet paper?
Is November 2010.
Leave is sought to table that document from a Cabinet paper. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Question number 10, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by his statement on the Pike River Royal Commission of Inquiry that, quote, "We are taking this inquiry absolutely seriously. We are determined to get answers for those families and we will leave no stone unturned," unquote.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. Will he be satisfied that he has fulfilled his promise that, quote, "We will leave no stone left unturned,"